So then, we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end. And then, as per the Yirmiyahu the prophet, we find in the 61st chapter very interesting information regarding then the time of the end. The Messiah said very many words regarding then the time of the end. As you can make layer upon layer, there is no precept upon precept and line upon line. What there is line upon line recorded. But those are not line upon line, neither precept upon precept, as many of the copy of the scripture, because what it means is layer upon layer. So then, we find the Messiah explaining many areas where you can layer then the 61st chapter. You can layer the 24th chapter of Mitchiyahu. He was a Levite. And then you can understand what he was talking about. What was he talking about? So then, you begin the reading then in Luke. What do we have in Luke? He's explaining then the time of the end. People being then caught unawares because of the ignorance of the times and seasons. Plain and simple. People are going to be caught up in mundane things. You know, the cares of life. You know, the Messiah, he was not talking bad of having families. He was not talking bad regarding of having a family, having a responsibility. The problem is, the Messiah was explaining tabernacling. They were shifting from the first tabernacle service, first menorah, to the second tabernacle services, second menorah, combining as tabernacling. He can be a bit confused if you don't understand what it means. So you have then first tabernacle service, singular, then you have second tabernacle services, both of them tabernacling. What was then the Messiah explaining regarding then Luke? In Luke you find then at the end of times, because the Messiah then, he was brought up to the mountain, and he began his explanation. The 24th chapter then, he was found himself explaining and reading the understanding of Yirmiyahu the prophet, explaining many areas of the scripture. Then he was brought out of the tabernacle, and then they were kind of trying to be big shots before him. You know, do you understand this huge temple? They want to make him king. He was not interested. So they were trying to be important before the Messiah. And the Messiah, obviously, he knew they wanted to have the time of Solomon. They wanted the kingdom restored. But not the kingdom to come. They wanted the kingdom of this age. The Messiah was not interested. So when they were scolded by the Messiah, in quote, then they got in their senses. In other words, they observed themselves as being stupid. They didn't understand what the Messiah was explaining. Then they said, you know, so how is it going to be the end then? And then he said, let no person deceive you. The Messiah was very blunt and plain. You boys are deceived. Don't you have the understanding of this temple? Not a stone is going to be left upon another. Because the Messiah was introducing then the second tabernacle services. That temple over there, the build did not make any more sense. The Messiah was tabernacling. They didn't understand the Messiah. They were understanding as then this person coming as a general, taking back the kingdom from the Romans, re-establishing then what they had from the time of Solomon, where they had this huge temple, you know, nations coming to them, bringing gifts, bringing gold, bringing silver, They wanted the riches. The Messiah, no, that's not going to be played. He was tabernacling. They didn't understand. They had so much clinging to this temple of theirs, it's not even part of the instructions. So you boys are deceived. Let no person deceive you. Then he explains why. Then he gives many understandings of the time of the end. He layers then obviously Yirmiyahu the prophet. He layers a section of it of Galah, because he was Galah, he was revealing. When you read the Revelation, you are reading Galah, you are reading tabernacling. You are reading the Messiah himself speaking. But then we were given the scandalized scripture. Luke explains, at the end of times, people are going to be caught up in their cares. They are going to be given relationships, and they are going to have a family. They are going to buy then a cow. They are going to buy then a house. They are going to buy then a tractor. Then they're going to build a barn. As it was during the time of Noah. Came the Vesuvius and they died. Then was during the time of Lot. The same cares of life, giving the relationships and having husbands and having wives and then having children and buying a barn and buying a house and exchanging a car. Then came from heaven then a shout of sulfur, and then they were burned. Thus the end of time, this is the way it shall be. Because people, they get caught up in their everyday, mundane, not evil. The Messiah was not saying it was evil. He said the cares of life. You then must understand what it means tabernacling. If you want then the everyday living and so on and so forth, join the leaders of the law. This is what the Messiah said, because the Messiah was so hard when he was speaking. Even his own disciples said, don't you understand? You heard those leaders? And the Messiah said, join them. He was not playing games. But how the Messiah can be so harsh? No, he was not harsh. What is instruction is instruction. What is not instruction is not instruction. Isn't that profound? People are going to be caught up then in mundane situations, having a husband and having a wife and having a house and buying a dog. Cares of life. The Messiah didn't say it was evil. But when you understand tabernacling, those cares of life, they get in the midst of it. And they destroy what the Word is trying to teach as far as this tabernacling is concerned. Then they become part of the world's cares. It's not bad. The problem is they don't understand tabernacling. Then later we received and scandalized the scripture during the time of deceit. Because people, they are not paying taxes. That's why church came to existence. Try to understand the content and the context. There is no sanctity or holy without the tabernacling. It doesn't exist. It's either tabernacling or infernal. There is no midpoint. No tabernacling, no salvation. Daniel the prophet was saved because he was from the lineage. He was from the covenant. Yirmiyahu the prophet was saved. He was from the lineage. David was saved because he was from the lineage. Are the Gentiles saved? No, they are not. They are not from the lineage. They are not from the covenant. No tabernacling, no salvation. There is no exception. 1,000 years of deceit went on. 1,000 years people were lost. Any exception of these renders the whole at no use. That's why the Messiah said precisely and exactly, whatsoever Moses told you to do and observe, these do and observe, because he knew the first tabernacle service was completing. Then, prior of his ascension, he said, go therefore around the world and form tabernacling. So they had to do what Moses told them to do and observe. There was a period of transition from the first to the second. Then, roughly 100 years of transition. Then you find Yohanan in the first holy city. Yohanan was set apart. He was then a Shaliach. And the Messiah then had brought him aside and showed him how to straighten out those other cities. 7 cities of Asia Minor. They were in sin. Those cities were straightened out. Thus started the relationship with tabernacling and the world. Gentiles. Time for the salvation of the Gentiles. No tabernacling, no salvation. No exception. The Creator does not play games, neither must we. So then, as we understand tabernacling returning, northern Sudan, land of Cush, read the prophecy of Yirmiyahu. When you read in English, it states very plainly, tabernacling. When you read in Hebrew, you read ciphered, ushkini. You have to understand the context and the content to determine what it is. Yirmiyahu already spoke a long time ago. Tabernacling, the returning of the holy cities. That's the first holy city of the time of restoration. Then we understand the Chinese system coming as then a neutral system amongst the nations. The 1,000 years of learning during the time of deceit discarded. Every person that died after the tabernacling had ended, those people, those souls were lost. Every person. That's why the Messiah was so hard. When he was speaking of understandings of the instructions, and people of the law coming around, mixing up with a religion of their own, their pagan understandings, and try to manipulate the system for their benefit, the Messiah would bust them openly. And sometimes he was so harsh that even his disciples came to him, they were hurting for the people. And he said, join them. If you want to play games with instructions and you are hurting for those people, then you join them. But don't scandalize the scripture. Every soul that died while they were then in the body, the flesh died. So their souls understandably died, because there is no coming out of the first death. They are in torment, but their souls died. Understanding from the viewpoint of the end of the age and the destruction of those souls in the second death, those souls are dead. Though they are not dead yet, they are in torment. But when you understand where they went, they are condemned. What was the understanding of the Messiah? When a person is in sin, a person dies in sin. He was speaking of the soul and of the body. So when you understand tabernacling, you have to understand as a whole. There is no salvation apart from tabernacling. That's very scary. So what is it coming in the future? It's very simple. It is already on the scripture. We have to read the worthy copy of it. The very original manuscripts of the Israelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end. Tabernacling, land of Cush, northern Sudan. That's where the tabernacling, the first tabernacling of the restoration period is going to be at. Read the instructions. Why is it going to be there? Isn't that northern Sudan at war? That's not the point. That's where it's going to be. Because the sons of the Ishmael, the sons of the first son of Ibrahim, they are around the area over there. And the Messiah started his tabernacling outside of Jerusalem. As he went then to the Samaritans, he was on the Mount Gerizim. There he was transfigured, because he was indicating tabernacling then had gone out of Jerusalem. It did not mean Jerusalem had no tabernacling. It meant the Messiah was then indicating salvation had started, and then Gentiles were on the list. No tabernacling, no salvation. That's why the Messiah was extremely strong when he was speaking of the spring feast. The Messiah had to wait for 1,000 years. Plus, they trained for more than 1,000 years for 490 days of ministry. We don't have the understanding of training and training and training every year for the coming of the Messiah. The Israelic people, they did. For more than 1,000 years they trained year after year after year after year after year. The natural effect when he came, it was not a picnic. From the land of Cush, we understand other cities are going to be then rebuilt, such as Asia Minor. Those 7 cities are going to be rebuilt. And many other cities. Yeshayahu did not mention the number of cities. Those are in the hands of the Creator. We don't have to be concerned with those. But don't think the Messiah was a mamby-pamby person, because he was not. If you think then the Messiah has scandalized his own father instructions to give you license to sin, you are insane. It doesn't mean you would never sin. You have to understand tabernacling, what it means tabernacling. There are no churches. Those were formed because people were evading taxes. Tabernacling was around. They were understanding then that these special people from the Israelic lineage, they were functioning many cities around, and they liked them very much, because whatsoever they were saying, if they would do, they would prosper every time. But then they neglected what the Messiah told them to do: pay the government. They were not paying taxes. So what went on? People would come together, congregations coming together as a group of people, and they would talk, of the Messiah, and then what they were doing, their dealings, and then would come around people from the government. Posing as a person with lots of money, want to invest, as they were doing. They were caught in the spot. May every man jack of you in jail. You're avoiding taxes. Then rather than going to jail, then, the inspector made a deal. You give me some money, then, turn around and I lie to the government. Welcome to the financial institutions. And then, sometimes the group will come together. Oh no, that group over there, the guy's charging a lot. Let's go to the other group. But then I had to come up with another facet of the religion to mix up with the dealings. In another group, in another group. And then we have thousands of these replete scoundrels, and the government is screwed. What was the words from plain English? What did the Messiah say? Give it to the government. What belongs to the government? Then be religious. The Creator is saying, if the people, they want some sort of organization, pay first the government. Then resume.